Parents are not a priority. Step aside. My son said that straight into the camera in the middle of his wedding photo shoot, as if my wife and I were just two chairs placed in the wrong spot. I stood there, still holding her hand. I heard the photographer counting down, and we were pushed out of the frame. Everything went quiet. Strangely quiet. No one objected. No one looked our way. And in that moment, I understood something very clearly. Some families only need one sentence to slam every door shut. If you're listening to this story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Maybe it's a quiet evening, or maybe it's after a long day when you need a moment to breathe. As for me, I'll keep going, because right after that moment, when we were told to step aside, something inside me began to change. After that sentence, I didn't say anything. I didn't know how to react. At a ceremony where everything had been arranged to look perfect, all I felt was Amelia's hand tightening around mine. She didn't turn to look at me as if she knew that one glance, just one, would make everything she was holding together fall apart in front of everyone. We had arrived in Charleston 2 days earlier. That morning, Amelia woke up early to press her cream-colored dress. She asked me very softly if her outfit looked too old. I told her no. I told her this was our son's day, and that our presence was enough. I truly believed that. The estate sat in the middle of a wide stretch of land, tall iron gates, trees trimmed into perfect lines. The southern summer heat clung to the skin. Inside, everything was arranged with a careful precision that felt almost cold. White chairs, fresh flowers with no scent, a printed seating chart in an elegant font. Our names were in the front row. I remember feeling proud when I saw that. When Noah walked down the aisle, I stood up without thinking. He looked different. The suit fit perfectly. The smile was measured. He didn't look toward us. I told myself it was nerves. I had stood in front of machines weighing tons before. I knew that feeling. I didn't think any further. The ceremony passed quickly. The vows were read smoothly, without hesitation. When they exchanged rings, Amelia leaned toward me and whispered that she remembered our wedding day. We had only a few friends, and a simple meal afterward. I nodded. I didn't know if she was holding on to a memory, or quietly comparing two very different worlds. After the ceremony, the staff began organizing the family photo session. A woman dressed in black, wearing a headset, spoke quickly and clearly. People moved where she pointed. Amelia and I stepped into the spot that had been marked for us. The sunlight hit my eyes directly. I squinted, but I kept smiling. That's when Noah walked over. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't frown. He simply stepped between us and the camera, as if that were the most natural place for him to stand. I heard the camera pause. Noah leaned in, speaking low enough that only we could hear. He talked about aesthetics, about the image, about how magazines would choose what to show. I don't remember his exact words. I only remember the feeling of hearing my son rearrange his parents the way someone adjusts a piece of furniture. Amelia took a quiet breath in. I knew she was trying to stay composed. So was I. I looked around. Isabella's family stood on the other side, already in position. They were dressed in matching tones, smiling softly right on cue. No one seemed surprised. It felt as though this had all been decided beforehand. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want this ceremony to turn into a scene. I gently pulled Amelia's hand. We stepped back, one step at a time. No one noticed. The lights, the lenses, and the smiles all remained focused on the center. We stopped beneath a large oak tree at the edge of the lawn. Its shade softened the sun, but not the feeling of being forgotten. From there I watched my son stand between the two families. He smiled, confident, as if he had stepped fully into the world he wanted to belong to. Amelia stood close beside me. She didn't cry. She never cried in front of others, but I saw her hands trembling slightly. I placed my hand on her shoulder. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't find the right words. Every sentence felt unnecessary. The camera clicked again. 1, 2, 3. Moments being captured. Moments that would later hang on walls, appear online, be printed on glossy paper. I knew that in those images, we would not be there. Not because we weren't present, but because we had been asked to step aside. I suddenly thought about the money we had transferred over the past months. The late-night calls from Noah, talking about extra costs. I never asked for details. I thought it was my responsibility. I thought that was how a father showed support. Standing beneath that oak tree, I realized a bitter contradiction. We had done everything to make this day go smoothly, and in return, we were asked to disappear from the frame of our own family. No one apologized. No one came back. The photo session ended with laughter and handshakes. As people began moving toward the reception area, I stayed where I was for a while longer. I needed time to accept that my place had been redefined, not by blood, but by visual value. At the time, I didn't know this was only the beginning of a long day, but I felt one thing with absolute clarity. Some wounds don't require shouting. All it takes is one sentence, said at the right moment, in the right place, to break a bond I once believed could never be shaken. As people began leaving the lawn for the reception area, Amelia and I slowed our pace behind them. No one rushed us. No one waited. Polished shoes glided over the gravel, leaving behind fragments of conversation and a faint trace of perfume. I heard Amelia sigh, very softly, as if she was afraid even the air might overhear. We followed a narrow path along the side of the main house. Under my feet, the gravel made a steady, rhythmic sound. It helped me control my breathing. I needed that. My mind was still suspended on Noah's words, not yet ready to let them settle. Suddenly, Amelia stopped. She bent down and picked up a thick envelope lying near the edge of the path. It wasn't sealed, just loosely held together with a small metal clip. In the corner was the logo of a bank I recognized immediately. I had worked with them years ago, back when I was running the machine shop. "Someone must have dropped this," Amelia said. Her voice was calm, but I noticed her eyes linger longer than usual on the fine print. We didn't mean to pry, at least not at first. But when Amelia opened the envelope to look for contact information, a stack of papers slid out and fell onto the stone step. I bent down to help her pick them up, and in that exact moment, I saw my name. It was printed clearly. My full name. Not in a congratulatory note, not on a guest list, but in a legal document. I froze. A light breeze from the coast moved through the trees, carrying moisture in the air. I turned the first page. Terms I never wanted to see again appeared in heavy lines. Mortgage, guarantee, financial obligation, and at the bottom of the page, a signature. The signature looked very much like mine, but it wasn't. Amelia looked at me. She didn't ask anything. She just looked, as if she already understood before I could speak. I flipped through a few more pages. Every detail was precise, almost cold. The asset mentioned wasn't the house we lived in. It was the old machine shop, the place where I had spent over 30 years working, saving, holding on to something of value for my later years. The amount being guaranteed was so large I had to read it twice. This wasn't a small loan to get by. It was a long-term commitment, tightly binding. The stated purpose of the funds was brief: real estate purchase. I didn't need to read further to guess where that property was. We didn't speak. We moved into a side hall of the estate where fewer people passed through. Amelia sat down on a wooden bench and placed the papers on her lap. Her hands trembled slightly. I had never seen her like that, not even during our hardest years, since when she asked, her voice rough. I shook my head. I didn't know. I tried to recall Noah's recent calls, the times he asked about old paperwork, the vague comments about things being just a formality. I hadn't questioned it. I had trusted him. I felt something inside me closing. Not an outburst of anger, but a door shutting very slowly, very firmly. I understood then that what he said during the photo session wasn't impulsive. It was simply the visible part of a decision made long ago. Amelia turned to the final page. She pointed at the signature. "This isn't yours," she said, stating what we both already knew. I nodded. I knew my own signature the way I knew the veins on my hands. I had signed hundreds of documents in my life. This one only looked similar. It didn't carry the weight of a real decision. While we were still sitting there, Amelia's phone vibrated. A notification appeared on the screen. She looked at it, then handed the phone to me. It was a link, an online sales listing. I recognized the item in the photo immediately. The vintage car, the one I had spent 5 years restoring. Every bolt, every layer of paint. I worked on it late at night, believing it would be something to carry memories, not just value. The title was short. The price was set high. The description said the car was being sold because it was not compatible with the current lifestyle. I read that line again and again. Not compatible. And suddenly I understood why Isabella hadn't mentioned the gift that morning. I had assumed they were saving another surprise. I had assumed too many good things. Amelia placed her hand over mine. She didn't speak, but in her eyes, I saw a disappointment deeper than the hurt from earlier. If during the photo session we were pushed out of the frame, now we were being pushed out of what we had built ourselves. I gathered the papers and slid them back into the envelope. I no longer felt shaky. Everything became clear in a strange, steady way. The pieces began to fit together. The distance, the money requests, the vague explanations. We sat there a little longer. Music from the reception drifted over, cheerful and unfamiliar. I realized I was facing a truth I could no longer avoid. My son didn't just want us to step aside in a photograph. He had been standing apart from us for a long time, in the most important decisions of his life. When we finally stood up to head inside, I no longer felt lost. Instead, there was a cold clarity. I knew this day wasn't over yet. And I also knew there were things that could not continue. Not if I wanted to preserve what little value I still had left for myself and for the woman walking beside me. We didn't go straight into the reception. The crowd was thick, the laughter heavy, and I knew that if I stepped in at that moment, I'd be carrying too much in my eyes. So instead, I turned left along the estate, toward a wooden door that opened into a small library. Few people went there. Quiet enough to hear my own thoughts clearly. Amelia followed and closed the door behind us. The air inside was cooler. The smell of old wood and paper eased the pressure I'd been carrying. Light filtered through tall windows, settling on dark bookcases. I had always liked places like this. They reminded me that some values don't need to be displayed. We sat at the long table in the center of the room. There was nothing on it but a jar of dried flowers and a few thick books. I placed the envelope down and didn't open it again. I already knew what I needed to know. I looked at Amelia. She gave a small nod, as if we had both arrived at the same place, without saying a word. Amelia opened her handbag and took out an old notebook. The cover was worn, the corners bent. I recognized it immediately. It was the notebook we used years ago, back when every expense had to be calculated. She placed it in front of us and opened to the first blank page. "We need to write it down again," she said. Her voice wasn't shaky. It was calm. So calm, it caught my attention. I picked up the pen. My hand was steadier than I expected. I thought about everything that had just happened outside, and I knew that if we didn't write it down, it would all fade into silence, the way it had for years. We didn't start with money. We started with time. The first year Noah left home, I remembered it clearly. I wrote it down. That was when I took night shifts, so he wouldn't have to worry about rent. No receipts were kept. Only mornings when I came home and Amelia was already awake, and we ate breakfast in silence. Amelia continued. The year Noah changed his major. Tuition went up. I sold my collection of tools from my apprenticeship days. Those weren't just tools. They were history. But I sold them without hesitation because I believed my son's future was worth more. We kept writing. The year Noah took an unpaid internship. Amelia picked up extra work. 3 jobs at once. I remembered nights when she came home late, her voice hoarse, still asking if I had eaten. None of that money was ever returned. There were no complaints. Each line we wrote was short. No explanations. Just events. Timing. What was given up. As the list grew longer, I realized something. We had never called any of it a sacrifice. We called it responsibility. And because of that, no one ever thought to value it. Amelia paused halfway through a page. She looked at me. "Do you remember the call in the middle of the night?" she asked. I did. I wrote it down. That call when Noah said he needed money urgently to take care of something important. I transferred it immediately, without questions. The next morning I went to work as usual. I never knew what it was for. The pages filled up. The air in the room felt heavier, but not with sadness, with clarity. Everything was suddenly too clear. We weren't writing to accuse. We were writing to face the truth. And the truth wasn't comfortable. It said that over the years, our place had been changing without us noticing. From parents to resources. From family to a backup plan. I set the pen down. I read everything from beginning to end. There wasn't a single line about Noah asking how we were doing. Not one line about him coming home without a request attached. I don't know why I hadn't noticed that before. Amelia closed the notebook. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her gaze had changed. No expectations, no effort to understand, just a quiet awareness. "We can't go on like this," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I thought about the words during the photo shoot. I thought about the envelope, the car. None of it was separate. It was the result of a long process, one where we kept stepping aside, kept moving back until there was nowhere left to stand. I understood that if we stayed silent today, tomorrow would be the same. And the day after that, too. Setting boundaries isn't turning your back. Sometimes it's the only way to hold on to what's left of yourself. Outside, the music kept playing. The party was reaching its peak. I stood up holding the notebook. Amelia stood beside me. We didn't look at each other for long. There was no need. When I opened the library door, I knew I had crossed a point of no return. Not because of anger, but because for the first time that day, I knew exactly where I was standing. And I wasn't going to step aside ever again. We stepped out of the library just as the music shifted to a different rhythm. The space outside was brighter, louder, and everything seemed ready for the part everyone had been waiting for. The dinner reception. I felt a strange sense of calm. Not because things were suddenly fine, but because I had stopped waiting for them to be. Amelia walked beside me. She slipped the notebook back into her bag, her movement firm and deliberate. In her stride, I saw a new lightness, as if she had finally set down a burden she'd carried for far too long. We entered the reception hall, just as everyone had taken their seats. Soft, golden lights washed over long tables, covered in white linen. Glassware lined up perfectly. Servers moved quietly, precisely. I noticed a few eyes turn toward us, then quickly look away. No one invited us. No one asked. We found seats for ourselves at the edge of the room. Noah stood at the front, holding a microphone. His voice was clear, confident, the voice of someone used to delivering prepared speeches. He talked about the journey, about support, about the people who had shaped who he is today. I listened. I waited. When he mentioned Isabella's parents, the room applauded. When he paused, the warmth stayed. There was no space left for us. I looked at Amelia. She wasn't surprised. She had probably expected this ever since the library. I felt something close again inside me. This time firmly. I stood up. No one signaled. No one introduced me. I simply walked toward the stage slowly without urgency. A few murmurs rose, then faded. I didn't take the microphone. I didn't need to speak. I placed a neatly folded piece of paper in front of Noah and Isabella. That was all. Noah stopped. He looked at me, then down at the paper. I saw a flicker of confusion cross his face, brief, quickly replaced by a polite smile. He unfolded the note. I didn't read it out loud. I let the room do its own work. On the paper, I had written simply, "I thank them for reminding us of our place. I said they were welcome to keep that seat, but the cost of maintaining it would no longer belong to us." I ended with one clear line. From this moment on, they were free and financially responsible. I stepped back. No explanations, no arguments. I knew every necessary word was already on that paper. Seconds later, I saw Noah glance quickly toward Isabella. She stiffened her eyes, scanning the room, as if searching for an exit. Somewhere, a spoon touched a plate. No one spoke, but attention had shifted to the head table. A server approached Noah and whispered something. Noah frowned. I saw his hand tighten around the microphone. The server shook his head slightly, polite but firm. I knew exactly what was happening without needing to hear it. The card I had used to cover every expense that day had just been declined. Not in anger, just a decision, made at the right moment. A second staff member appeared holding a small board. I saw Noah read it, then look up, his eyes unsettled. Isabella leaned in, whispering urgently. People seated nearby began to sense that something was wrong. The warmth in the room slowly turned cold. There was no shouting, no chaos, just silence, spreading, table by table, row by row. Noah tried to say something into the microphone, then stopped. He cleared his throat. On his face I saw something I rarely had before. Unpreparedness, not for a speech, but for consequences. Isabella's family began exchanging looks. Polite smiles disappeared. An older man stood and walked toward the head table. I couldn't hear what was said, but I could see the shift in how they looked at Noah. No longer pride, but reassessment. I turned back to Amelia. She stood as soon as I reached her. We didn't need to ask anything. We had already agreed, back in the library without words. As we walked out of the reception hall, hurried voices called after us. Noah called our names. His voice was higher than usual. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to hear more. Everything that needed to be said had already been said another way. The doors closed behind us. The air outside was cooler. I took a long breath. Amelia held my hand. Her grip was warm, steady. We crossed the lawn past the oak tree, where we had stepped back earlier that afternoon. This time we didn't stay at the edge. We walked straight through. Not slower, not faster. I don't know what was happening behind us. And I didn't need to. What mattered was this. For the first time that day, I wasn't leaving because I had been told to. I was leaving because I chose to. We didn't rush to leave the estate. The road to the gate was long and quiet enough for the sounds behind us to fade, then disappear. I heard the gravel under the tires as we climbed into the old pickup. The engine started steady and familiar. That sound gave me more comfort than any music from the party we had just left. Amelia sat beside me, leaning back in her seat. She took off the earrings she'd worn all day, held them in her palm for a moment, then gently shook her head. "Not mine," she said, more to herself than to me. When we reached the coastal road, she rolled down the window and let the earrings fall. They disappeared quickly without a trace. Amelia exhaled, long and light. We drove toward the ocean with no specific destination. Dusk was settling in. The wind carried the smell of salt and the quiet relief of an ending. I thought about Noah, not with anger, but with a sadness that finally had its place. I knew that from this day on, our relationship would be different. Different didn't mean over. It just meant there were boundaries now. My phone vibrated a few times. I didn't look. Amelia placed her hand over mine, a silent sign that it wasn't necessary. We had said enough for one day. Rushed replies would only stretch out what we had already brought to a close. We stopped at a small pull-off near the shore. The water ahead was calm, reflecting distant lights. I turned off the engine and sat there. There was an emptiness inside me, but it wasn't frightening. It felt like a room that had just been cleared out. Nothing arranged yet, but clean enough to breathe. "Do you regret it?" Amelia asked. I thought for a moment. "No," I said, and I knew I meant it. Regret usually comes when you realize you were wrong. Today I only realized I had let things go on for far too long. We stayed there until night, fully settled in. Then we drove back to the small hotel we had booked earlier. Nothing fancy, just quiet. The next morning, I called the bank. I asked to review every file connected to the machine shop. The paperwork was adjusted. What didn't belong to me was separated out. Everything moved slowly, but firmly. Noah called. I answered. The conversation was short. No arguing, no blaming. I told him I loved him, and I also told him that from now on, all financial decisions needed to be transparent. He was silent for a long moment. I didn't push. Some lessons need time to sink in. Isabella's family never reached out. I wasn't surprised. Their world runs on different standards. We're no longer part of it, and I felt lighter because of that. A few weeks later, we returned home. The machine shop was still there, the familiar smell of oil and metal. I opened the door and stood there, looking at the tools that had followed me my entire life. I don't work as much as I used to, but I know this place is still mine, legally and in spirit. We began planning a trip. No rush, just places we used to say someday. Old roads, small towns, no tight schedule. No one we needed to prove anything to. One evening, sitting on the porch, I thought back to that day in Charleston. If not for that sentence during the photo shoot, I might still be stepping aside. I might still believe silence was how you kept the peace. But some silences only invite others to cross the line again. I'm sharing this story not to judge, but to remind. Parents love unconditionally, but that love is not permission to be taken lightly. No one should lower their own worth just to keep a seat in a photo or at a party. As the sun set, Amelia poured tea and placed a cup in front of me. She smiled, just slightly. I knew we had lived through a long day, and that we had walked away at the right moment. Freedom isn't always about leaving someone. Sometimes it's simply about standing where you belong again. Thank you for listening to my story. If it gave you something to think about, please like, subscribe, and share, so others can hear it too and reflect on their own lives. Your support helps stories like this continue to be told. The final message I want to leave you with is simple. Family is not measured by money or appearances, but by respect. Parents can love unconditionally, but that doesn't mean they must accept being diminished. Setting boundaries is not selfish. It's how you protect your dignity and your peace. Thank you for staying until the very end.